admin and all handled.
what was going on, where I lived, things of that nature. And I was interested in finding out how Hitler came to power and what was the causation of all of this that happened. From my investigation, it would appear that Hitler actually was preying on the lives of poor people, like Castro did with Cuba, saying that you poor people, we're going to make you better, we're going to give you more food, more property, things of that nature. When actually, in reality, I believe that what Hitler's goal was is to create a state of super race. And that means he had to eliminate all of the little inferior, quote unquote, people, such as the Jews, the gypsies, and people of that nature. Fortunately, that didn't occur. And history has it that the Jews, the gypsies, everybody else opposed Hitler did survive. I will say that the time that I was in Magdeburg, I was able to see that a city that we lived in was actually an industrial city and very prominent in all of Germany. But during the war, unfortunately, I think about 2 weeks before the end of the war, the Allied airstrike nearly leveled Magdeburg completely. And that was a very disastrous and unfortunate event. And when I heard about that, I felt very badly. But the bottom line is that um, in 1937, I think Hitler started to take over many parts of Europe, and he was working his way already into Germany, into the various cities, one of which is where I lived. What happened is that he was rounding up all of the Jewish men who could be workers in their slave labor camps. And I remember, even as a young child, that during the nighttime, on at least 5 or 6 occasions, the Nazis came to our home and knocked on the door looking for my father and my uncle who lived with us at the same time in the same apartment building. Fortunately, they knew that the Nazis were coming looking for them. So during those occasions, they would run and hide in the woods so that they couldn't be caught. This was the beginning of my mother, my aunt, my other aunt, who are all sisters and all worked for different lawyers, said, this is the end of our life here in Germany. We've got to get out. And so arrangements had to be made. Fortunately, all of three, my mother and the two aunts, were all working for various lawyers. So they had a connection that could give them the opportunity to find a way out of Germany at that time. They went ahead and booked a reservation on the last official boat from Hamburg, Germany, to the closest port in the United States, which is where my mother and my two aunts wanted to go, and that was to Cuba. For my father, like it would be for me or anybody else that's worked his whole life to develop a lot of their personal wealth and things of that nature, you can imagine the shock and the horror of someone saying to you, pack your little suitcase and get ready to leave your home, your belongings, your car, your business, and everything that you've worked so hard to do. When I think of that myself right now, at this particular time in my life, it would be almost impossible for me to say, all right, I'll do it, I'll leave. My father said, let's go to Poland, because he thought that they would be out of the danger zone. My mother, of course, said to him, we're leaving from Hamburg on a certain date, time, and place. If you want to go, then you better be there. Otherwise, we're leaving without you. The trip actually involved my mother, my father, my sister, and I, and our family. and my Aunt Esther, her husband, and her two boys. And then the youngest sister, was a lady by the name of Sita Brummer, Brummer. And at that time, she had no living children, but she was pregnant. The boat that we went on was called the Orinoco, which, surprisingly enough, many, many years after we left Germany and came to the United States, I saw that boat parked in a port in Miami, and I was in total shock that that ship was there. What I assumed was a big ocean liner was like a freighter. I think maybe there were 100 people on that boat. And to cross the Atlantic Ocean, it took 7 days on that ship. Unfortunately, my aunt's child was then in her stomach, died because of the rough waters and things of that nature. And that baby was buried at sea, which was a very tragic event. And I'm sure at that time, my aunt thought about why was she taking this trip. Of course, later on, she realized how important it was to leave Germany at that time and not be assassinated by Hitler and his troops. Eventually, she gave birth to two other boys here in the United States, both of whom became successful doctors. And so I knew that she felt very good about that situation. The When we got to the boat, the docks, the Germans were there with their German shepherds growling and barking at all of the people getting on the ship. And they made sure that all of the possessions, including the few dollars or marks that were in the possession of the passengers, were taken by the Nazis, including little bits of jewelry. So, in effect, the people that got on that ship left with no possessions whatsoever, other than a small suitcase with some of their belongings. That in itself was a tragedy, but it gave rise to the type of people that the Nazis represented, how horrible they were, and how difficult they would be on anybody that opposed their regime. The ship took about 7 days in very rough waters, and my mother and my aunts all wanted to go as close to the United States as we could get. And unfortunately, at that time, that was Cuba. At that time, Cuba was still permitting some refugees to come into the country. And on the crew, the ship that we were on, I know from conversations with my parents that there were doctors, lawyers, technicians, artisans, people of all kinds of backgrounds. And the Cubans at that time were happy to receive us because there were so many good, working, hard people that were living in Germany and were fleeing to Cuba. Unfortunately and tragically, our ship was the last official boat to be accepted into the Cuban waters, and they let our people land in Cuba. The next ship, as many of you may have heard about, was the St. Louis, another very famous ship that left Germany and was trying to get into Cuba. But at that time, I guess Cuba was afraid of an overpopulation of refugees, and they went ahead and refused that St. Louis to land in Cuba. And tragically, that ship was returned to Germany, and who knows what catastrophic events occurred to the people on that ship. So we were very lucky. We were in Cuba from 1939 to 1941. Even though the government was run by a dictator, Batista, Cuba at that time was a thriving city with many, many wonderful features, all kinds of tourists coming and going all the time. So it was a great opportunity for refugees like us to come and open up a business of any kind. My father actually was a peddler in Germany, in Cuba, and in the United States, meaning he was a door to door salesman selling dry goods, shirts, underwear, things of that nature. And that's what he did while he was in Germany, while he was in Cuba, and in the United States. Um, our story is a typical good story about a middle class Jewish family interested in the education of their children and wanting nothing more than the success of their children to be happy and successful in their endeavors. In my particular situation, my father and mother sent my sister, who's 3 years older than I am, to college. My sister became a very well known and educated teacher, lived in Baltimore most of her life, and was very successful there. I, on the other hand, always wanted to be a lawyer since I was in the sixth grade, and we were always running around playing against the wall of a building next door. And finally, the owner of that building said, "This is enough. You guys are ruining my frontier here under the wall, and you're defacing it, and I'm not going to let you stay." So he went ahead and took us to the small claims court. And there he told the judge, "These rotten kids are ruining my property." I was in the sixth grade at that time. And one of the fathers was a very successful engineer. He said, "Max, you be the spokesman." So I told the judge at that time that we were just trying to have a little fun, stay safe, using the wall of the building to bounce the ball off the wall and have a good time, that we would paint it and take care of it. We would not create a problem for the owner of the building. The judge was so impressed with the little bit of argument and story that I gave him that he dismissed the case with prejudice. And we went ahead and used that building for the next 4 or 5 years while I was still in grammar school. I then went on to the University of Florida, where I attended school and had a wonderful education there, and met many, many new friends, some of which came from Miami Beach High School, where I graduated. And eventually I went to the University of Florida, the University of Miami Law School, where I was involved in many activities. And there I became an attorney, and I practiced my law for 55 years. And I can tell anybody that's interested in becoming a lawyer or going into the legal field that I can honestly say that in my 55 years, there was never one day in my life that wasn't exciting, something different every single day. And since I was involved primarily in civil, commercial, real estate, wills and trusts, most of my clients became friends of mine. And to this day, almost all of the clients that I've encountered over my years, I'm still friends with most of them. And I have a great respect for them, and I'm sure they have that for me. The one thing that I can say is that in my office, I made sure that they knew that, except for the pro bono cases that I handled, of which there were many, that there was going to be a charge, notwithstanding the friendships that we had. In fact, I had a pillow in every chair that said, "Talk is cheap, except when you're talking to a lawyer." So they got the message loud and clear right at the beginning of our conference. The bottom line is that we were very lucky to have left Germany, being accepted in Cuba as we were, and making a good life. The success story of a middle class Jewish family growing in Miami Beach, Florida. And I've had my own encounters with prejudice and things of that nature. In my senior year of high school, I used to work always on the beaches as a cabana boy. And one of the instances, I saw an ad in the Miami Herald that said, "A cabana boy requested come to the hotel for an interview." The hotel was named the Ivanhoe Hotel, which was in the north end of Miami Beach, Florida. At that time, I didn't know that that hotel was restricted. Basically, no Jews, and no dogs, and no blacks, African Americans. But I said, let me go over and speak to the cabana manager, which I did. And he told me at that time that the hotel was restricted and that if the owner of the hotel knew that I was working there, he would certainly ask me to leave. I said, I'll take my chances. I'm sure that the guests in the cabanas are not all of that type of individual. And so I said, let me give it a try. I understand the ground rules and I know the conditions under which I'm working. And so I took the job and worked there the entire summer until about 2 weeks before the end of the summer, at which time the owner came to the property and apparently asked the cabana manager if he had hired any Jewish people. And the end result was that, of course, he said, yes, he did. And that the cabana boy outside, Max Hagen, was one of those that he hired. The bottom line was that he came out to see me and told me, look, I'm sorry, Max. As I told you before, if the owner came and he found out that you were working here, he would ask you to leave. And he did tell me that I would have to leave that day. At that time, I had already become friends with all of the people that I worked the cabanas for. I taught many of their children how to swim, told them about school, how important education was. And that was a very important message that I conveyed that the people in the cabanas appreciated. And I went around and decided how would I handle having to leave on one day's notice, really 2 or 3 hours. So I decided, let me be truthful. I went around and spoke to all the people in the cabanas and told them what had happened, that I knew that the hotel was restricted, that I would rely upon my personality, my integrity, my upbringing to be able to deal with people of any type, any nature. And the end result was that I was friendly with every single one of my customers. And from a monetary standpoint, of course, they usually tip the cabana boys at the end of the summer. And to my utter amazement, on that day, I collected $4,000 in cash. Can you imagine in 1953 what that meant to a poor Jewish kid from South Beach, knowing that that would be a real bonus for me? And the end result was that one of my cabana guests said that you still have 2 more weeks or so, 3 weeks before you have to go to school. I have a parts airplane company near the airport. And if you would like, I would like to have you come and work for me for the rest of the summer. I immediately agreed and told him that I would meet him the next morning near the airport at his place of business. I came there and he said to me, I'll work in the shipping department. You do whatever you can to help out. So unfortunately, he was one of these individuals who didn't have the same upbringing that I did. And when he took me into the shipping department, there were 4 or 5 gentlemen about 45, 50 years old working in that department. And the first thing he said to them when he introduced was, good afternoon, gentlemen. This is Mr. Max. He's your boss. Well, when he said that, I nearly dropped to the ground. And the bottom line is that I said to him, no, I'm not your boss. I said that after he left. I went home and I told my mother what a horrible situation that would put me in, having no experience at all, being so young, and telling these hardworking individuals that I was their boss. She said to me, look, I'll make sandwiches for them. I went out and got some cans of soda, some pretzels, and potato chips. The next day I came to the office, went into the shipping department and gave everybody their sandwich, their soda, and their chips. And my whole life changed at that moment. I saw the smiles on their faces. and they knew that whatever I had told them was true and that I was there to help them as much as possible. So that was an experience that I had figured out that that would be a wonderful experience in my part, and it did. Um, it made me realize the importance of how you have to treat people and that you should always respect them no matter what color, race, creed that they might be. Age was of no importance. And I've lived with that my whole life. I did a lot of pro bono work during the time that I was a lawyer. And although that took time away from the money making endeavors, I've never regretted that. And frankly, from my standpoint, I know that it built character in the way I live my life. And now that I'm living here in North Carolina on a permanent basis, that was as a result of my wife falling in love with North Carolina. And as many of you may have heard, uh, a happy wife is a happy life. So that's the motto that I can give to you. Also, when I got married, my rabbi told me that marriage is like a road. Sometimes you have 10% of the road, sometimes you have 90%. The success of my 54-year marriage to my wonderful and beautiful wife is that I kept on the 10%, she had the 90%. So, from that standpoint, a little bit of advice to any of you that are planning to get married. In fact, when your wife says jump, you say, how high? The bottom line is that living with your family and making sure that your children get an education is something that is so important. And all of my kids are very successful. They respect us to every degree that's possible. And I feel that my wife and I have given them all of the important things that they needed to know. And now that I've asked them to support me, they seem to have shied away. When people came into my office and said, I need to make a will, and I have 12 children that I need to support, including grandchildren, and I would say to them, how come two parents can support 12 kids, but 12 kids can't support two parents? So the bottom line is that you work hard, you develop your own abilities, you develop your own wealth, you make enough money to take care of your needs when the time comes. And from that standpoint, that's where I'm at. I must say that my career, my character, the way that I've run my life is very, very much to be praised for the way that my wife has treated me over the many years that we've been married. Um, she's been a guiding light for me. She's there whenever I need her. And for me to have met her, been lucky enough to marry her, which almost didn't occur because later on, after we went out for a while, she told me that if I was a criminal lawyer, she would have never married me. So I'm glad that I chose the civil end of the law. And in that standpoint, that's stood me in good stead all of these years. I wanted to say that it's been a pleasure for me to be a part of this, not so much for the benefit of my grandson and those of you that are listening, but to let you know how important it is to, excuse me, to remember the Holocaust and the importance of that event in our lives for now and for the future. So don't be ashamed, don't be afraid to tell people what it meant and what it does mean. In one particular instance, while we were living for a while part time in Tennessee, my wife heard about a school in Tennessee. Whitwell was a very small city, all white children, all Baptist or Presbyterians. And she decided she would go there and see what it was like. When she got there, she found that an eighth grade teacher went ahead and decided to show the kids in his class what the Holocaust meant, because they were teaching that at that time. And so he told the kids, how am I going to demonstrate how terrible it is for 6 million people to have been slaughtered and killed? We're going to go ahead and gather up 6 million paper clips, put them in a big jar, and when you see how many paper clips you've collected and how many barrels it takes to fill that up, you'll have a small understanding of the terrible event that took the lives of 6 million people. People from all over the country contributed paper clips to the to the event. And in fact, a couple from Berlin that heard about that went ahead and actually shipped a boxcar in which Jews were put in to take the concentration camps. And that was part of the historical museum that they created. So here's an example of people totally unrelated to the Jews that showed how important it was to make an impression on all these young kids of the importance of the Holocaust and what it should be recognized for many years to come. In any event, sorry for getting a little emotional about it, but for me, I feel very lucky to be an American, to live here in this country, and to have the good life that I've had. So all of you, make sure that you live every day for the benefits that it can give you, and don't think about the bad times, think about the good, because they will overpower everything that you do. Thank you very much for giving me your attention. And I think there's some people that may have some questions, and I'll be happy to answer.
Yep. Thank you very much for your speech. That was very, very influential and very motivating. The first question we have is, how long did you live in Cuba? Are you fluent in Spanish? What other languages do you speak besides English?
Well, what happened is when we went to Cuba, naturally, I was young and I learned the Spanish and was very fluent in Spanish. And my father and my mother also learned Spanish. And we were there for 2 years before we were able to get a rich uncle of ours from Detroit, Michigan, to sponsor us to come to the United States. But at that time, in order to become a US citizen, you had to speak English, read English, and understand English, something that I understand is no longer the requirement, but I thought it was very important. And so my sister and I spent a lot of time teaching my parents how to speak English, how to read English, and to be able to converse in that language. They, of course, became US citizens and they got their citizenship papers. Minors were automatically US citizens when their parents became citizens, but I, in my own feelings, felt that I wanted my own certificate of citizenship. And so I applied for that. And I, to this day, hold that dear to my heart. And that's the answer to that question.
Thank you. What do you want to be remembered for? Your legacy? What do you want to leave behind?
Well, basically, be kind to others, live your life like the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and never look back at anything bad. Try to always look at the good things that you've enjoyed in your life and make that like.
Thank you. How have you passed down your knowledge about the Holocaust to future generations?
Well, as I've indicated over the years in my practice, whenever the occasion arose, people would ask me what about my background. I would basically tell them about how lucky I was to get out of Germany at that time, to come to the United States, become an American citizen, live the middle class dream of success for my family and my friends. And so that I hope is my legacy.
Have you donated any historical pieces to any museums or anything like that?
Yes, there was a cousin of mine that told me that in Magdeburg, they were trying to recognize all of the people that were born in that city, and they welcomed them to come back to Magdeburg, Germany, and to see what they had done to bring back the rebirth of that city after World War II. So my wife and I were invited to go there, and I wasn't sure my wife would enjoy it because it was more of a symbol for me than for her. So in order to accomplish that goal, I first took her to the Munich Festival. Hopefully, she would get drunk enough to enjoy anything that she might not appreciate. But frankly, when she got to Germany, we were greeted by the mayor and put up in a 5-star hotel. And he even gave us about 300 marks, which I'm not sure what that equivalent to in the United States dollars. But I said to him, this is ridiculous. We brought money. He said, no, this is just a small way of our thanking you for coming here as a born member of this community. He also provided us with a chauffeur, a driver, and told us that the rabbi would take us to the cemetery where my father's mother and father were buried. And they even arranged for us to go to an orchestra, a concert. And he had two young German children kids that were in college that picked us up at the hotel, took us on the trolley, and spoke perfect English so that we would be comfortable. So they did everything that they could. And the highlight of the trip was when they told us, come to the city hall. We've gathered up a bunch of memorabilia that would indicate, your history here in Magdeburg. And to Barb and my utter amazement, they had a long table set up in the conference room. They had the place where we were living. They had the hospital where I was born. They had the place where my sister was born. They had the place where my father worked. They even had a letter that my mother had written in 1927 to the zoning department indicating that she needed some kind of assistance. And their records were unbelievable. That's one thing I found out about the Germans. Their record keeping was unbelievable. And frankly, I felt at that time my wife had convinced me to bring all of the souvenirs that I had here, the documents that I had gathered from my mother and father. So I had the actual original tickets from Germany to Cuba, from Cuba to the United States, my birth certificate, a bunch of documents that I went ahead and gave all of the originals, which they made copies for me, to them, and they were grateful because they felt that this was a historic event for them as well as for me, and that they would put that into their museum of documentation. One of the sidelights was when the mayor asked us to go for lunch, and I did go with my wife, took us to a very fine restaurant. And during that conversation, I was going to ask the mayor a question that I said he didn't have to answer, but I said to him, this is so generous of you to do what you're doing for us in inviting us and having all these wonderful things for us to do. Is it because you feel guilt because of the Hitler situation? He said, look, I wasn't even born at the time. And no, I don't mind you asking. This is an event in our lives that we're ashamed of. And frankly, I'm glad you asked the question. And for sure, it's people like you that grew up in this little city of Germany and became successful in the United States that we want to recognize and honor you for that.
Thank you. And can you tell everyone the story about the time when you were 4 years old in Germany and you stole a car?
Well, first of all, I didn't steal a car. As a budding lawyer, I would never steal from anybody. And so that's a good lesson to be learned by everybody. No, this was my father's car. We lived on a little hill, and I was very adventurous at that time. I said to myself, the car is sitting outside. Why don't I go out and take a little drive? So I went outside. I got into the front seat of the car. I could hardly see over the top of the window. And I said in German, Bremse los, which means brakes loose. And all of a sudden, the car started to move. Fortunately, my uncle was just across the street. He saw the car start to move. He ran over and grabbed the steering wheel, put his foot on the brakes, and luckily, I'm alive to tell that story.
Yep. And our last question we have, why do you think Jewish immigrants from that time were so motivated to be successful?
Well, I think the motivation is the freedom that we've received here in the United States to do all the things that we wanted to do without restrictions. And frankly, that's the lesson that that everyone should learn from this kind of a situation. And I'm proud to say that I've lived that dream myself.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mr. Hagen. My name is Matthew Kiss. I'm the programming executive of HRM. I'd just like to thank everybody for coming, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I hope everybody was able to learn something and take something meaningful from this experience. If you enjoyed, we will be having another event like this sometime in the upcoming months. You can find us on Facebook. And once again, just thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the event.
Thank you, Max, for sharing your story.
Thank you, everybody, for being involved and listening to me.
All right, good night, everyone.
Good night.